She has worked for more than 36 years in the field of downtown revitalization and rural economic development. She serves as the director of the North Carolina Main Street and Rural Planning Center at the North Carolina Department of Commerce, where she manages the Main Street programs, rural planning programs, and the Rural Transformation Grant Fund Downtown Revitalization category. Prior to her position, she worked for downtown revitalization nonprofits in Sumter, South Carolina, and in Chapel Hill, Greensboro, Lenoir, and Lexington, North Carolina. She's also a certified Main Street manager. Let's give it up for Liz Parham.
You know, I don't think stages are meant for people that have knee replacements, so you'll... well, it's great to be with you tonight. Again, I'm Liz Parham. I'm the director with the North Carolina Main Street and Rural Planning Center. And you know, as I started thinking about this presentation, and actually a friend of mine asked me the other day, how do you define community? And I thought it was a really interesting question, considering that we have this presentation. I define community as the entire state of North Carolina. And that is probably very different than most of you. But hopefully, at the end of this presentation, you too will define it that way. Next slide. So we're going to talk about place. Next slide. And place is often defined by the people in a community, certainly. But for me, it's also defined by the downtown districts, the downtown buildings, the historic preservation, the theaters, which I happen to love theaters, the public art, the public spaces. Next slide. And it's also defined by the whirligigs in Wilson, or the murals in Elkin, or the Pocket Park in Lumberton, or the streetscape in Goldsboro. Next slide. The North Carolina Main Street program is a downtown revitalization program. It's economic development within the context of historic preservation. And we work in 82 communities across the state of North Carolina, from Murphy in the far left to Manio in the far right, and everything that you see in between. And all of these communities have a downtown revitalization coordinator or director at the local level that's guiding the work. And our work is to provide strategic planning, training, education, guidance about their programs, and help to get their projects done. Next slide. Now, all of these communities are working under a platform that we call the Main Street Movement. And it works like this. Communities identify what their most unique assets are. And then those assets will guide how they will transform economically, transform their communities over the next 5 years. And then they will apply the 4 points of Main Street, which includes economic vitality, design, promotion, and organization. And our communities in North Carolina have been doing this model, this platform, for 43 years. Next slide. So economic vitality is really about diversifying the economic base of a community. It's not just about putting new retail shops in or new professional offices. It's about retail, restaurants, service businesses, professional offices, nonprofit uses, governmental uses, cultural uses, and residential uses in the downtown. It's about creating opportunities for investment with new businesses, new rehabs, new public improvements. And it's also about building that entrepreneurial ecosystem so that new businesses of all types have the opportunity to open up in the downtown districts, to expand in the downtown districts, to find new opportunities for wealth and growth. Next slide. Design is about everything in the physical realm. It's certainly about streetscapes and building rehabs, but it's also about creating public art, displays, signage, creating places for people to gather, Inclusive playgrounds, like you see there in Reedsville that just opened up about a month ago. Next slide. Promotion is about creating opportunities for gathering, special events, retail sales activities, also image building campaigns and branding. But it's also about marketing what are the most unique assets for each community. Storytelling, localism, helping communities to understand what's unique about their communities and how to best tell that story for growth and advancement. Next slide. An organization is about the human and the financial capital of a community. It's about building that leadership and capacity. It's about finding opportunities for the community to really engage with their community. And it's about partnerships, public and private partnerships. One of the previous speakers talked about their partnerships. We cannot do downtown revitalization without both public and private partners. Next slide. And so in advancing the opportunities around the state, we created what we call the Main-to-Main Trail. And I would invite you all to go on this URL and explore the state of North Carolina with me. Now, North Carolina is a very interesting state because if you think about it in terms of regions, the regions are very, very different. Some, whoops. Some may think that they're all the same, but they're really not. Next slide. So we have the Sandhills region where the longleaf pine first grew. We have the Southwest region, the Charlotte region, and it's the financial center and NASCAR, but it's also Cheerwine, if you like Cheerwine. And the small communities around that region they have the amenities that the Charlotte region has, but they're small scale. The Southeast region is where the beaches are, certainly, and Calabash seafood, but the oyster trail and the communities there have the boating heritage and lots of activities in the downtowns to do. And the Northeast region, the Outer Banks and also the Inner Banks, is a place where you can get the freshest fish, but you can also explore the culture of the history and the heritage of the state. Next slide. Piedmont Triad, better drink some wine, but you also better eat some Lexington-style barbecue if you're in that region. It's got the richest culture, the arts, the theaters, the museums. The Western region has got the Great Smokies, certainly, but it's also where the craftspeople live. It's the craftsmen of our state. The North Central region, the Raleigh region, where we're sitting right now, has got the amenities again in those smaller communities. And the Northwest region is where furniture grew up, and furniture was raised. And so what you have there are makers and craftsmen and artists. Next slide. So our Main-to-Main Trail has a map that I encourage you to go on and explore the state of North Carolina with me. Next slide. Each dot on the map will take you to one of the Main Street communities, and you can dive in a little deeper and learn what's unique about each community. Next slide. The Main Street program, again, has been in North Carolina for 43 years. This past year, we saw $684 million in investment in our Main Street and small-town Main Street communities. We saw nearly 3,000 jobs created, nearly 400 businesses. That's investment at its best. Next slide. And since our program has been in inception, $5.2 billion has been invested in our small and medium-sized communities. Over 35,000 jobs and nearly 8,000 new businesses in Main Street and small-town Main Street towns. Thanks so much.
All right, let's get to questions.
Thank you. Great presentation. So having grown up in a small town, Conover, North Carolina, Piedmont area, love this. My question would be, how does a town, if they're not part of this program, what does that look like and how long does it take to kind of see the benefits from that?
You know, that's a great question. There's another side of my house, and that's called our rural planning program. And our rural planners work in the non-Main Street towns, but they still do strategic economic development planning. We do asset mapping. We look at market data, and we help communities so we help communities all over the state. We typically work in towns under 50,000, not the larger cities, because they have the resources. So we're really a small and medium-sized program.
Go over here.
Thank you for that presentation.
Yeah.
I was just curious what your public participation process is and how do you go about mitigating potential negative impacts such as gentrification, displacement, and those kind of things?
You know, that's a challenge for a lot of our communities. We really encourage our communities that we're working with to diversify the community engagement as much as possible. So we do community surveys and user surveys and various ways to gather that information. We also do public forums and vision forums and things like that to try and get the representation of the community involved in the decision-making process. Gentrification is a challenge, to be honest with you, with the downtown revitalization, because the ultimate goal is we're trying to increase the values of properties and business opportunities. Now, one of the ways to get around that, though, is to create those ecosystems which open up the opportunities for business growth and development, as well as ownership. Some of our communities have been pretty good about creating incentive programs that will open up that ownership, and that's what we encourage and try to always encourage.
Did you have a question? Oh, okay. Do we have one more question over here? Okay.
Hello. What if you came from a very, very small town? What do you suggest the first step might be to revitalize a very tiny town?
Well, that's a great question. Our smallest community is actually 350 that's in our program. That's Hayesville, North Carolina, in the far, far, far west. But really, to answer your question, we begin by identifying the assets that are unique to each community. That's the first step. Every community has assets. Sometimes the local community doesn't necessarily recognize that they have assets. So we look at the human capital of the community. We look at environmental assets, natural assets, cultural assets, governmental assets, economic assets, and try and drill down to see where the best growth opportunities are.
Thank you, Liz. Wonderful presentation.